Unboxing a 15-inch Surface Book 2 with 1TB SSD as a rental from Groover. So Groover is a company that is in my country available, and what they do is they rent out notebooks. The reason I rent out this notebook is because mine is in repair. So therefore, let's see what is also in the package. We have basically the shipment thing, and it costs me for 1 month of rental, which is what I calculated the repair will actually take in terms of time. It costs me 145 euros, which you would argue is quite expensive, and it is. But the option I would have otherwise is to have no notebook. What I tried, this already looks really nice. What I tried in the last few days was to use my Galaxy S10 with Samsung DeX as a notebook replacement, but I soon had to realize that this was just not working properly. So let's just see what is in there. I also, for quite some time, actually considered the Surface Book 2 as a very nice thing I could potentially get as a notebook. I also have basically a Spectra, a 15-inch Spectra, and so the Microsoft Surface Book is basically a pretty close competitor, just with the main advantage that it actually has a detachable screen, which is very nice. The main downside from this, or why I actually went with the HP Spectra, has multiple reasons. So one of these reasons is the fact that if you have a detachable notebook like this, then the problem is that it is not as stable as another notebook. So with the hinge, for example, on the HP Spectra, you can just take the screen, flip it to the back, flip it back. So it's pretty rough, and it also is pretty durable, you could say. With something like this, where you take off the screen, you have more moving parts and therefore more potential risk. So therefore, these are, it's not therefore, but I'm just continuing with what I was trying to say. It's the Microsoft Surface Book 2 15-inch. Why the 15-inch? Because I need the bigger screen, because I use it as a secondary screen on my setup, which I actually showed in multiple videos, and I probably will also show when I actually install this, and then later on in the video have this basically here as a second screen. It has a Windows 10 Pro. My current notebook has Windows 11, and also other notebooks have Windows 11, but when I made Windows 11 as basically a criteria online in Groover, then there were almost no notebooks left. So it seems that I have to work with Windows 10, which is also fine with me. Even though the dark mode is very nicer in the other one. It has an Intel Core i7 processor. It has the GeForce GTX 1060. My Spectra had the 1050 or the 1060 with 6 GB of RAM and 1 TB of RAM, which means that I can use my normal setup with about 1 TB of storage on my notebook. So let's actually take a look at the package. It's pretty heavy, and it also is not, so these are not new because these are actually rentals, so people actually sent them back. You can actually rent them, so I also figured I could potentially just rent my notebook for basically my business, which would be something that would also potentially make sense, but only, and I think in the long term, if you stick with a notebook for like 2 years, or in my case now 3 years, then it potentially makes sense to buy it, because of course you are paying the company, because the company is an intermediary in between you and the actual manufacturer of the notebook, which has to be paid in some way or another. Therefore, you are basically paying the company as a premium, just in terms of economics. It is actually pretty hefty cartoon, and well, it wouldn't have to be this thick, I guess. It could also just come in a normal box, but this would of course not be such a nice unboxing experience. So here we have now the Spectra, and no, it's not the Spectra. Here we have the Windows logo, and I actually tried this a few times already in the store, and also it is quite heavy. That's also another factor you have to consider, I guess. And so now let's actually try this. And I took this basically as an opportunity to try an alternative notebook. Also potentially I figured I could now get a gaming notebook and not one that has a detachable screen or is a 2-in-1 that actually has the benefit of a pen being attached to this. What I also am realizing right now is that at least until now there seems to be no pen. I don't know if the pen comes with this or not. In terms of, let's just take a look at what it looks like. So it is pretty, it weighs a lot. but also my other notebook weighs a lot. And also this has a different screen ratio, which has benefits, but also has downsides. And I will continue, I guess, to discuss these. So it has kind of a good feeling. It is distributed evenly, which is kind of nice, I guess. What I also heard is that at least some part of the processing is also in the actual screen. Because it has to be, because if the screen works without basically the keypad, then it has to work as a standalone device. So what you can do now with this device is that you can rotate it up to a certain angle, and then you have to actually switch it over. So this only works if the notebook is on, otherwise the hinge only extends as far as this, which is also another downside, less flexibility. Because if you only can extend it as far as this, if you just, the Spectra for example, I can lie completely down if I potentially want this scenario. And then I also can take it and just move it back on the hinge. And here I have to press a button and then it takes a few seconds every single time. I will probably not power it on at this point in time. It's also just an unboxing. Maybe I will make an actual review after I used it, but my now biased opinion of not knowing anything about this device actually, apart from the fact that it runs Windows 10 and it has these specs, will actually not make that much sense, I guess. So let's just take a look on the outside of the device. And another factor, of course, is that I will try to restore my original data from the Spectra onto this device, which I also previously discussed. We have apparently, again, Windows Hello cameras, infrared, which is very nice, I guess, and is also quite an industry standard. I actually don't know if it has a... It apparently doesn't have a fingerprint sensor, so the Spectra also had one as a direct competitor, you could say. What I really like is the simplicity. The Spectra has a number pad, and my previous Spectra, I had another one before, didn't have a number pad. And the nice thing now is, if your notebook does have a number pad, you have to type off center, which means then that this pad also has to move off center, which makes the whole notebook asymmetrical. And since I, at least to some extent, or at least until very recently, until I bought actually an external keyboard, which is the MX Keys, until then I typed completely on my notebook, even in a two-screen setup. What this meant for me is that my whole desk is symmetrical, and the notebook was not. So therefore you are always kind of off center, and then you're looking onto the main screen and being off center. So having things symmetrical is just something I am really looking for, and this is symmetrical. So in terms of how portable this is, there is also another downside, I think at least, which is that there is this gap in between there. And this gap in between there means that there can be potentially a lot more stress onto the hinge. Because if you think about it, if the gap wouldn't be there, then any pressure that is applied to this would be distributed evenly among the surface towards the other surface, basically. But if there is a hinge, and this here, then the hinge is one contact point where the pressure actually can relieve itself onto the rest of the device, and this here. So now if you press here, then what you have here is, let's say you have something sticky in your backpack, for example, or you stick something against it. What happens is actually that it now bends in the middle, because there is no pressure that pressures against the middle. So therefore, I think this might be a potential downside in terms of long-term durability. The hinge seems to be very well made. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 different parts where the hinge is actually made out of. And of course, this is kind of an engineering marvel, you could say. So it seems that there is basically the part in the middle, in the center, that moves, and the other one, I actually don't quite understand how it works, because it is also, as you can see, it is very round. With other hinges, I think it often is clear, at least on my Spectra it was clear, that it is just a hinge, and then if this is the hinge, the notebook can rotate around the hinge. But here it seems to be another mechanism, because the center of rotation seems to be moving as you close the notebook. And this is maybe what makes this also so difficult to produce. Another main factor why I didn't decide actually for the Surface Book 2 at this point in time, so this is the 2 version. I think there is also already a version 3, which of course is the newer version, but this one was just available and the other one was not. And the Surface Book 3 actually had only the 13.5 inch, so it would have been the smaller one. In terms of opening this notebook up, what seems to be the case that there is this opening up thing you can get in. It also has a kind of a MacBook vibe, even though it has a different color, so it is, I think, a unique style. I really wanted at least to try this in the past, until I eventually settled on the Spectra, because the design language actually really spoke to me. I guess, as I already mentioned, the main thing that got me away from this were, first of all, something I haven't mentioned yet, the price. Compared to the Spectra, this was just pricier. With the same specs, and this is then mostly the same computer, I guess, apart from the ports and maybe the design feeling, this was significantly more expensive than the Spectra. The Spectra cost me, the first one I actually bought, with 1 terabyte of SSD at this point in time, so this was 2017, I think the Surface Book was already out. The first one actually cost me around 1.8, so 1.8K. Then the second one cost me also a little bit more even, because I also opted for the 2 terabyte SSD, and the first one already had an older graphics card, I think the 950MX or something like this. I'm not entirely sure about the naming. And then this one already had a built-in GPU. And then the Spectra also came out with a built-in GPU, which in terms of the Spectra is the 1050. Here we have the 1060, which again, of course, doesn't mean that it will be basically magnitudes faster. Of course, I can expect kind of the same processing power. Another big factor that actually is a downside of these very portable 2-in-1 devices, or this is not even a 2-in-1, it's much more a tablet that is also your computer. And just this intrigued me actually very much. I think it would make sense to still, within the unboxing, potentially remove the screen and see actually how the screen is, how I am able to handle the screen. Because another potential benefit of, at least temporarily for me, using this device is the fact that I can try basically using this device as a showing device for videos. So therefore I can take my HP pen and draw on it, and I can then just show it. Of course I have to work it out with the mirror and so on, and the focus is also something that is potentially more difficult. But this is just an option you don't really have if the base of the device is always connected to the tablet of the device, the screen. So therefore on my HP Spectra, if I actually would have taken it, then it would be a really big brick, just like this is a very big brick. Of course I could also use this, and the HP Spectra in comparison has also the problem that it has very large screen bezels, at least the version from 2019 that I have, whereas this one, of course it doesn't have the thinnest bezels, as you can see, but the bezels are significantly reduced, at least compared to the HP Spectra. This also means that the overall footprint of this is, in terms of thickness, I think it is a little bit thinner, at least on this side, not so much on this side, probably. But I think even the Spectra could be, I think the Spectra is probably on this side, because the Spectra has things that stick out in the bottom, for example, and just the simplicity of this. Just this being basically a sandwich made out of 2 tablets with a keyboard attached to it and a hinge attached to it. And it just also feels so nice. It would be very nice if they offered a completely black version or a matte black version, because I actually don't really like things to be distracting having colors, as you see on my shirt and also the background. I think it just makes sense for things to be things and therefore not attention grabbing in terms of color. Of course, if you want to bring yourself to work more potentially, then something fancy that then has something like this color, for example, is then attention grabbing, and it grabs your attention whenever you enter your studio, for example, or your workplace, and so on and so forth. In terms of cameras, the cameras on the HP Spectra are not that good. There's actually only one camera, and here, as a big benefit, because this is a tablet and also kind of works as a tablet, we have 2 cameras. This now means you can take pictures, potentially, with this, or also detached. What we also have, because of the tablet form factor, is we have the power button on here, which is potentially also a downside because maybe you don't want the power button up here, which is a little bit of a stretch. And what you also have is the 2 volume rockers here. Now, the keyboard itself. This is a sound that is very well engineered. I guess people spend months, potentially years, potentially since the evolution, since the invention of the keyboard itself, optimizing the haptic feedback of something like this. And apart from the Spectre, which is also on a very high level in terms of haptic feedback, this is also on a very high level of haptic feedback. It was actually also one of the main points that drove me towards considering the Surface, because it just felt so nice. And so now, again, this is just choice architecture. If you want to write, for example, and you have to write usually on a computer, emails, it doesn't matter what you write. The nicer it feels to write, the more over time you will be engaged to write, actually. And so having something like this, I think makes sense. I can actually move it closer to the mic and press a few buttons. There is kind of a deep bass to it, which is very nice. And the device doesn't completely vibrate. It's just a perfect combination of this click, but also this click with deeper frequencies. So I think they have done a very nice job. It also has backlighting. I think the HP Spectre has 2 different modes of backlighting, 2 different levels of backlighting, one that is a little bit brighter and one that is not so bright. The touchpad now does also feel very clicky. You can click it at any point in time, even though these points on the bottom work a little bit better. So there's a little bit more travel on the bottom compared to the top, but you can also potentially click it at the top, as you can see, and here. This, I think, is also a very nice design feature, as I already mentioned, but it is just a very good made design overall.